Hi, and welcome to another exciting episode of Dream Talks. It is absolutely my pleasure to bring to us a friend of mine named Tom Ledbetter. Tom is just an incredible man. He really understands and gets and even teaches the idea of dream intelligence. This is a person that is a political voice. He's an advisor, he's been a pastor, he's an overseer, he's a consultant and an advisor to business people, to CEOs. He does a lot with intelligence through dreams, and this guy, man, this guy knows how to build. So let's bring Tom in. Hey, Tom.
Hey, John.
Thanks for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. So we always do like a pre-conversation before we get started, and Tom was just rolling. Like we were talking about. I think the question I asked you, because there's so much that we could talk about. I remember when we met. We met at a wedding, and it was kind of like, hey, what do you do? What do you do? And it was like, well, I kind of do this thing called spiritual intelligence. And you're like, really? I teach dream intelligence. And I'm like, really? I do dreams too. And it was one of those things like you just found your long lost brother. Like it's because, I feel like there's such an amount of pioneering in the movement of spiritual intelligence and dream intelligence and all that, to find somebody that like gets it and understands that you don't have to go on this diatribe explaining, no, dreams really are important, and no, God really speaks today in that way, and no, you can really get actionable intelligence through them. You were just like we were just rolling. Like 2 minutes into the conversation, we were like, just off to the races. So that was really cool. I really enjoyed that when I met you, and we've had the opportunity to get together, talk a few times and spend a little time together. And I think you have a really interesting and unique perspective.
Yeah. Well, I remember meeting you, and it's kind of one of those things. You're kind of feeling people out, and I think both of us were surprised, right? We were because of you've met a lot of people, I've met a lot of people, and what God's been having us do as is the same with you has been, it's not common, at least it wasn't common when we started. It's becoming more common, but just our stories, our passion for spiritual intelligence, and the way that we look at spiritual intelligence. I've never met another individual like yourself, and have been greatly refreshed by knowing that there's people out there, like you and me, that God has been training. And it was incredible, man. I've really enjoyed getting to know you, and look forward just to seeing all God's going to do.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I feel the same way, man. It's been really cool. Um, how did you get started into dreams? Like what made you? Because it's almost like I almost see it as like a specialty in the prophetic. It's kind of like the redheaded stepchild for a long time of the prophetic, and now it's becoming more and more mainstream. But people that like really dig into dreams, and like you said, it's a huge portion of the day is just spent reading dreams that people send and trying to give wisdom and provide understanding and interpretation. And like once people know you're a dream guy, they just like everybody has a question and a dream. Can I send you this? And sometimes you get handwritten stuff from 90-year-old ladies that's 6 pages long, and you're just like, what do I do? So how'd you get started, man?
Yeah, so it all started in 2009, and I'd been saved for 2 years. Went on a mission trip overseas to East Africa. Was unreached people group. Never seen a white person. Never heard the name of Jesus. No running water. No electricity. That was my first mission trip, and I was hungry, wide-eyed, bushy-tailed to actually see that God is who He says He is, and I wanted to see the miraculous. And I remember, just like it was yesterday, a spiritual father of mine took me to northern Kenya, and I saw the Book of Acts. I saw everything that I desired to see, and I realized that this was everything I've been looking for my entire life. And I had a moment that night. I'm looking at the stars, and there's no, it's all real light there, so there's no, it's just this, like the stars are sitting right on your head. And I just remember saying, God, my life's yours. I want to do this the rest of my life. Well, Went into my room that night, and the Lord walked into my room, had an encounter with him. And from that moment on, I began to dream every night. Got back to the States, and my wife's like, "Who are you?" She didn't know who I was. Of course, you've seen the entire book of Acts. I mean, there was very little I hadn't seen. I felt like I was living in this supernatural realm, and God began to enlist me into what I would call the school of the Spirit through the vehicle of dreams. So I would dream every night, didn't know what it meant. But I would write them down because I knew they meant something. And I would say I did that, John, for, again, this is 2009. I would say I did that for about 4 or 5 years while I'm doing that. And then I was growing in the prophetic. I was growing in discernment. I didn't realize how much the dreams were impacting my life. And everywhere we would go, I mean, we were doing restaurants, we were going out of the country, we were going to other states. People would be sharing their dreams with us. And I just had an ability to it just came to me. And I just would get the understanding as they were sharing them. So I got thrust into it, wasn't looking for it. And then people were like, "Wow, you're really good at this." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not trying to be. It's just, when people get around you, not only that, they begin to dream. So people would come stay in our house. They would get activated. They would come downstairs. They'd be like, "Man, I had this incredible dream." And they would tell me their dream. And then I would just read the dream back to them. And it was like I was getting proficient at understanding spiritual language. And long story short, we had some people approached us, said, "Hey, we really feel like you need to start a school of dream intelligence." Well, actually, they didn't tell me school of dream intelligence. They said, "You need to start a school and begin to train people in dreams." And I'm like, "I don't want to do that." And then I got approached from 2 prophetic people, and they said, "How do you do what you do?" And it's the same word John Paul Jackson got. And I said, "I don't know. I just do it." They said, "Well, if you don't train people how to do what you do, then the gift will die with you." And so I realized I had to train and teach what I do, and I didn't know how to do it because it was given to me by grace. And so that was the hardest part, was how do you teach something that you so genuinely and so easily are able to do, but how do you pass that on to others? And we're now 4 years into what we call the School of Dream Intelligence. And we've trained a couple hundred students from 16 nations, all throughout the U.S., probably 20 different states. And we've seen people, God building them in their day-to-day life, in their business, in their family, in their sphere of influence. They're hearing God, they're following God, they're becoming a place of encounter. They're interpreting people's dreams. They're going through the same process that I went through. And so that's kind of taken us into this realm of dreaming and understanding and building, which I like to say the main thing I really look at in dream is blueprints. When I'm looking at people's dreams, it's like the Lord's highlighting their blueprint. This is who you are. This is where you're going. This is how you're going to get there. And we begin to unpack and build with the prophetic language of dreams.
So you see all that in like one setting, the whole blueprint of somebody's life, who they are, where they're going, what their calling is, identity.
Yeah, typically it's through a series of dreams. Like for our school, we do, you've got a pretty intensive school yourself. We do about 24 hours of training in our first session of our foundation. And I go through these different gates of dreams. And typically I'll look at, probably 30, 40 dreams for a person. And out of that, I can create a blueprint for, a lot of things that are identity focused, transformation of seasons. What's the season they're in? How do they align with that? And then when they begin to say yes to that, the understanding opens up. They begin to walk out a prophetic process and really into what I call an apostolic pathway, because it's really about the inward formation of Christ in the person, and God's forming that in them. And then we're seeing a lot of them shifting into business. I mean, one of the great things in the community we're seeing globally is a lot of people that were ministry-minded missions. God's now thrusting them into the marketplace with blueprints, and they're learning how to carry what they learned in missions into the marketplace and be missional in what they're doing as far as building business, making disciples, hitting the target for what they're called to. and beginning to step into this transfer of wealth reality.
Wow, that's amazing. So you're seeing actionable stuff
Yes,
that now
sir.
when you talk about seeing blueprints and being a builder, what does it mean to you to be a builder?
Well, for me, it really means to come alongside of an individual. And when I say come alongside, it means to come alongside of their process. Paul says that, though you have 10,000 instructors, yet you have few fathers. And I really see, God raising up, his house, and putting his house in order, and then beginning to, fill his house with his spirit, which I really believe is the evidence of dreams. Like I would say Joel 2 and Acts 2, if you're not experiencing that, you're not in the move of the spirit, because the move of the spirit is defined by dreams, visions, and prophecy. So if we're in community and we are growing progressively into Christ, we should be having dreams. We should be having visions. We should be having prophetic encounters. Not and our view of prophecy is so limited, because Revelation 19:10 says the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. So God tests people to give them a testimony. And so I see coming alongside of an individual's process, it's the spirit of Elijah when it turns the hearts of fathers to sons, and that prophetic reality to begin to thrust people forward and push them to Jesus. And so when whether we're building in the marketplace or whether we're building in church, usually emerging kingdom leadership and specific graces, because let's say you have an apostolic calling on your life and you're young. Well, you're going to have dreams, visions, encounters that are going to be conducive to who you are as a person and your development. And so we just come alongside of that. We facilitate. I believe in the facilitation of the Holy Spirit, of God appointed leadership. And so we somewhat facilitate that process, and we see disciples being made, not just disciples, but disciples begetting disciples, because they're all learning. Number one, how do I be discipled? How do I transfer discipleship? And it's like, number one, if you're a dreamer and then other people begin to dream, it's one to dream together individually, but then how do you dream together? How do you dream collectively as a community? And then we're going into regions. We're saying, hey, how do we dream collectively as a region, and then begin to look to a region in the realm of development? And then it's a whole different ball game. So the last few years, God has taken me from an understanding, hey, how do you pastor a community through dreams? Through now, how do you look at regions? How do you look at cities through dreams, to begin to put the right people in the right place? How do we come alongside of that?
Have you done anything like put a regional dossier together? Like, what are the dreams of what God is saying over the city you live in, or anything like that?
I've never done anything official, but I have it in our archives, where we've archived all of our dreams, and we have intel. So for many cities, that the people in our schools are tied to, because what happens is, when people start to dream in a city, that intel and the revelations released, and we really want to see intercessors arise with this understanding of dreams, which I really believe is the manifestation of God saying, I'm going to build my house of prayer, and I'm going to bring them to my holy mountain. I believe that dreams are taking us up to the holy mountain, and we're getting this intel, and that way we get it, we come down, and we can actually do something with it, and leverage that intel for strategy and kingdom infiltration. So it's something we're working on. We're still kind of ironing all that out. How do we encapsulate all of it? How do we begin to use? We're very early on in the stages of that.
Wow, it's fascinating. I love city transformation. I've done a fair amount of work before doing dreams in city transformation, and one of the things that I wanted to do, and we actually started to do when I lived in Reading, was put together a document, and we were actually even going to do a documentary film called Why Reading, where we were going to look at the physical history of the city, why it was named and what were the economic booms. But then we were going to look at the spiritual history of the city and what God was saying Reading would be. And then how to put an action plan in place. Like if it's going to be an entertainment hub, it's going to be like a mini Hollywood. Well, then let's get some investors and start building sound stages. If we know that that's the destiny of God, over the city, what a safe investment that would be, so let's put some money behind it and some action behind it on a city level. And I started that, and then I was called out of Reading and went a couple of other places, but I've been able to share even some of the work that we did there that was phenomenal. A lot of people are talking about city transformation or regional transformation. And I think if you're serious about that conversation, the first thing you have to ask is, what are we transforming into? Like, get a vision from heaven, like you said, a blueprint of what is the destiny of this city. And so hearing people running into people in Reading that were having different dreams. One guy actually got taken up into like this map room of heaven, and there were these maps of nations. And it said, and he asked, there was like this angel with him, what are these? Well, these are the prophetic destinies of our nations. And then he saw bookshelves all over the place, leather-bound books with gold etching. And he found Redding, California. And he said, what are these? And he said, these are the destinies of cities. And so he opened up the book of Redding, California. And so that was one of the essential pieces that we were going to put in this document. Like, this guy went to heaven and the destiny of regions and cities and nations, and he read what was in the book for the destiny of the city, and so I'm like, man, what if we had a core group of people in every city, or even just the top 100 cities in the US, or just the top 100 most failed cities in the US, and we talk about advancing the kingdom of heaven. We started creating a value for understanding actionable intelligence from the prophetic, from the seer gifts. And I think dreams in particular, like you said, for blueprints. And then you connect with the fathers in the city, and then you put together a plan and say, this is what God says, Waco, Texas is going to be, or Redding, California, or Toledo, Ohio, or Kansas City. And then begin to build prophetically towards that direction, and not even just prophetically, but begin to call in, again, if it's entertainment, begin to have the intercessors call that in, begin to have the business guys find some property and begin to invest and make a place for those kind of businesses and transformation to occur.
Yeah, I think that's where we're headed. And I think that is, there's been lots of words about, God raising up Josephs and Daniels, which I think that's true. But we've talked about how not everyone's a Joseph, not everyone's a Daniel. There are far few dream interpreters out there than we think. But God is definitely raising them up. And one of the challenges that I run into daily is the lack of understanding of the prophetic, the lack of understanding of the apostolic. What is it? How does it work in a kingdom reality that actually builds outward, but it's not building a ministry or a man. It's looking for terrain. It's looking for territory. We're looking for leaders that want to do this together. They don't want to do it all by themselves. And so I actually have seen in the last seven years, the Lord beginning to take the prophetic spirit, specifically actionable intelligence, and take them into, where God's pioneering new types of leaders that are this. They're looking from a new era. They're looking from a new lens. They're not looking the same ways that the structures that have been built. They're building outside of the cultural norm, like David, when Ziklag was given to him. And so I believe there's those that are being hard pressed to begin to build outside of the camps, and they're beginning to build into business. They're beginning to build into enterprise, because the number one thing that I have a burden to begin to give evidence to, I think we are afraid as Christians to begin to step into prophecy that actually produces evidence. And I think intelligence should produce evidence, and evidence of transformation. For instance, like, we're not there, right? But this is my heart. How do we begin to leverage prophetic intelligence where people that don't understand who we are, but they understand and equate that there is tangible value to us being around, and there's tangible value to the strategies and the blueprints that we're given. And so, for instance, I worked for a man for over 10 years in the city, And that's when I really God encountered me. I went on a journey with him. I wanted to get out of business for years. And then, but God kept blessing me. We kept seeing deliverance, salvation. We kept seeing God moving in the midst of this corporation. We began to plant churches and dig water wells in other nations. And this was far outside of their grid, but there was a kingdom culture that was coming up in the business. Many were going on mission trips that would never go to church buildings. And I began to realize now that the intelligence, God's looking for people that are going to do something with it. And the people that are getting the intelligence need to connect with the right people that are actually going to value it. So I think we have a massive misunderstanding of what prophecy is, what intelligence is, how do we take actionable steps towards that to really create definable transformation.
Wow, man, you said a lot there. That's pretty incredible. What we're seeing too is I believe that spiritual intelligence is basically the new movement in the prophetic. And, so often, and especially in past seasons, we'd have, what felt like the man of power for the hour who would stand up and say, this is the word of God over the nation. And what we found is, well, you didn't see this and you didn't see that. And what about the election of 2020? What about everything that happened in 2020? Where was that on the prophetic grid? And what we're realizing is you get a piece, and as I began to pray after 2020, and there were tons of dreams and tons of intel that was released. And, I don't know that anybody felt that they nailed it in totality. We sure did. And we got some pieces that others didn't get. But as far as really, here's the blueprint for how the year's going to unfold, I don't know anybody that got that. But looking back, I was praying and I just felt that, 1 Corinthians 13, in part and you prophesy in part. And I always thought, well, when the perfect comes, the partial will be done away. And I always thought that was Jesus's return. And then it kind of hit me. What if the parts came together? The whole idea of no kidding unity, like upper room, like, some prophet gets up and he shares a dream, but he shares it with an interpreter that specializes in dream or spiritual intelligence that can read the dream and provide the understanding instead of just saying, here's a dream, do with it what you want. Or another prophet gets up and he shares a word, but then he mentions 3 or 4 other guys that have had a similar word. And then now you begin to centralize intelligence information. And this is one of the things when I first started, again, through a conversation I had probably 6 years ago or so about spiritual intelligence. But, the conversation was just simply, if we really believe this stuff, like if you settle the issue in your heart and you really, really believe, it doesn't surprise you anymore that God gives you intelligence through dreams or prophecy, like you've settled the issue, we really believe it. Why isn't there a full-time agency advising the president of the United States or working to keep America safe? And so that's what we've been building and working towards, and we have launched to a small extent, but that's something that you've talked about as well. And I think once you get over the question or the wow factor of, oh my gosh, God really does speak through dreams, then it becomes a regular part of your life. And then you open up to, how many times can you say, are you kidding? You can't make this stuff up. And it happens over and over and over again. But I want to go back to something you said, Tom. You said right at the beginning of that last statement, you said you feel like the church is afraid of, and correct me if I'm using the wrong words, but it was like afraid of prophecy or revelation that leads to concrete, actionable intelligence. Did I say that right? And if so, why do you feel it is that way?
Yeah, I feel like that we're afraid of actually having to give account for something that would have to produce evidence. I think it's naturally that prophetic people that are called to prophecy at a higher level are called to be prophets. There is a vast amount of opposition that we encounter, and there's a vast amount of criticism. There's a vast amount of, and there's these massive structures that tell us what we need to do to be relevant, and it's almost that it's more relevant to prophesy things that cannot be grounded and become evidential. It's almost we've been conditioned by the world, and by the opinions of man and by the desires of people that want this, I would call it cookie cutter Christianity, that they just want something. And because where it has to be definable, people have to take up a cross. They have to actually die to themselves. They have to become built in accordance to the pattern that's being prophesied. So I think that we have a vast misunderstanding of the end goal of this thing, which is knowing him and sharing of his fellowship, the fellowship of the sufferings, being conformed into his image. I think we vastly lack an understanding of discipleship in a prophetic culture. I think we vastly misunderstand what it takes, that we're called to be evidential living epistles read by all men. Therefore, instead of raising up messengers, what if we actually tested the message in the messenger to make sure it was valid? And so we want to look at the track history of what's been built, what's being built. Like when every messenger meets the Lord, which they will, they're having an encounter with the Lord, they will bear the image of the message in which they met him. And so you and I, we're intelligence guys, and God has, made us probably pretty unintelligent, right? Because the foolish things that confound the wisdom of the wise. But he's given us this intelligence. And I remember Bob Jones said, he said that after he passed away, that this next generation would be marked by one of the last verses in Daniel, that they would shine with the brightness of, and they would shine with understanding and wisdom. And I believe we're seeing that happening, but I believe we've traded in the word of wisdom for the word of knowledge, John.
Wow. I like what you said about it's almost, a lot of prophecies are almost like nailing Jello to the wall, and it's almost really the gift of exhortation. It's like, breakthrough is coming, and, things are going to shift, and, blah. And it's just like, I want to hear a week from next Tuesday, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have a contract with this guy, and it's going to yield this amount of money, and then your family's going to move, and this house, and this, and that. It's very specific. It's what I call go, no go. Like, you're going to know a week from next Tuesday if this guy was wrong or if he was dead on, and there's no two ways about it. There's 5 things that he said that are markers that you can verify: times, dates, locations. And as we've done work with governmental intelligence agencies, with people that, do things like counterterrorism or working to keep, the president safe or things like that. And we've gotten national security threat assessment words. You can't send up fluffy stuff like, oh, well, we believe the president's life is in danger. Like every day, like nobody can, but you have to say, we believe, because of a dream, because of multiple sources of intelligence, that on this day, at this meeting, in this location, at this time, between the hours of here and here, something is going to happen. A person with a gun is going to approach, blah, blah, blah. And that's the difference, too, if you work with law enforcement, of what like a credible threat assessment is. If somebody calls in and says, hey, there's a bomb in the school, blah, 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 nobody cares. But if they call in and they say at 1 p.m. under the east stairwell, this is going to happen, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's a level of specificity. And I think part of it is we're afraid of being wrong. We're afraid of being exposed, that perhaps we don't hear like we want to hear. And I think part of unity is that level of vulnerability. And the Bible even says we know in part. So it's okay to come to the table and say, guys, I don't have everything, but I got this piece, and I'm pretty darn confident on this piece. I don't know the date, but I feel like I got a location. Like, what do we do?
Well, it's safe to prophesy in these settings and cultures that we've created. I'm convicted and have been convicted that, I really believe, and it's in my heart, that, okay, God's pouring out his spirit. The evidence of what I believe I'll stand before him will be, how did I facilitate vessels to become the brightness of his rising in a culture that is going into deep darkness? How are they going to light up the night? And, God gives us the solutions to walk this out. But I believe we've created these safety nets. We've created these cultures that, hey, we're going to come in and practice prophecy. Well, John Maxwell, he gives this 5 tiers of leadership, and I've been reading it. I love it. I think we could implement it, and we should be implementing it into the nature of building and the apostolic and the prophetic and church culture. What the first step is position. And I think there's so much, misunderstanding over position of prophets, prophecy, what the roles of those are. But from the next step, you go from position, you go into permission. And that's process, where we give people a right to come into process. Like, I'm a developer, I train people. So I use the God-given position to give people permission. And then that's where you give them an opportunity to make a mess. And the church needs to be a place where people can make a mess. But then when you shift from the tier 2 into the tier 3, you're going from permission to production. This is when you're demanding that people produce. And this is, in an orphan culture, like in a prophetically driven environment, we say, well, you have to produce. Well, no, I don't. I'm a son of God. Well, the Bible says in Romans 12 that you ought to prove the will of God. Therefore, if you're a prophet or a prophetic person and you're getting intelligence, you should be proving that in your life outside in culture, in a dark culture. Not only that, the fourth context of beyond production is reproduction. How are we reproducing this prophetic culture in a reality that hates us? In a reality like, Daniel served Nebuchadnezzar. He had 3 guys, part of his prophetic intelligence team, that were in the fire with him. This was happening. I believe we're afraid to get outside of the walls. We're afraid to take the gifts and callings of God into the earth and actually realize we've been given dominion and been given a territorial mandate. And the last phase of the leadership, you go position, permission, production, reproduction. And the last one, which I want to tie this into what you're saying, was where you get respect. If we're going, I believe, like in these places that God is, these testimonies of like police stations and FBI and these governmental organizations, that's not something that I'm currently moving in, but I long to do that. But I'm gripped that whatever your sphere of influence is, wherever prophetically God's driving us to be intelligence agents, what's our reputation? Like, if we don't have a good reputation, we probably need to evaluate where we are and begin to think, how are we shorting God? Because this intelligence needs to be going out. I'm reminded of Gideon, right? Going into the enemy's camp and God saying, hey, go down there. I'm going to confirm this to you. And it's crazy. He goes down to the camp, and the enemies are having dreams and about a barley loaf coming down the hill. And they said, this is none other than the sword of the Lord and Gideon. And how in the world do you equate the sword of the Lord to barley? And then they interpreted the dream, and there was an infiltration aspect. I believe that the Lord was looking. Gideon was getting outside of his comfort zone. God met him there. He confirmed it through a dream, and they took the land. I mean, God supernaturally imposed himself over that with angelic help. And, I think these are things we've got to consider in our leadership and as prophetic people. How are we positioning ourselves? How are we giving people permission to grow? How are we producing? And when you go from, it's a big deal when you go from permission to producing leadership, because you're making a demand. You're saying, this has got to grow. You've got to grow. There's not only you got to grow, you got to multiply. And then you've got to earn respect amongst your peers.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's almost like we don't want anything to be required of us.
Exactly.
And I've talked to, people that had a prophetic gift, and they've come to me as a strategist and just said, hey, I want to develop this. What do I do? I said, are you tracking it? Well, what do you mean? Well, ask God for a prophecy that has 5 data points that when you prophesy, you can say, okay, I said you have 5 kids. Do you actually have 5 kids? No, I have no kids. Okay, well, you got that wrong. I said you're married, you and your wife. Are you married? Nope, never been married. Okay, well, you got that wrong, right? So far you're 40% off, and and even begin to put a demand on heaven. One of the things that we do in our culture with the Spiritual Intelligence Service is the deputy director of the Spiritual Intelligence Service is a general. His name is General Tully, and he used to be the general. He was a Green Beret, so he was the general of the Special Operations Command Korea. So this guy understands, like you talk about real world intelligence. When you're a tier 1 operator, Like you got to know that your intel is right or people die. And even worse, when you're a commander and you're sending people, guys, over the hill, to, hey, go take that place over the hill, go in here and do this. You want to know that that your intelligence is accurate, so you can do a threat assessment, how many people you're going into. And so he gets it at a level that most people don't, from an experiential, lives on the line type of intel. And one of the things that we continue to do and push for is what we call an RFI. You would put in the military, you put in a request for intelligence. Hey, we're going to go Halo drop into North Korea or whatever it is, right? So we need to know where we're going to land. What's the weather going to be like? What's the topographical map of the area? Or wherever it is. Not that we're doing any of that, but for any situation. And so we do that. When we get a situation where people are coming to us and saying, hey, we need a political strategy for a campaign, or hey, we need to know a situation where somebody's stuck overseas, almost like a hostage situation, which we actually had recently. We put in, okay, God, we're putting a demand on heaven, an RFI. And when I've talked to people in the prophetic, they're like, you can do that? And I'm like, what do? Do you sit under a tree and wait for God to strike you with lightning to speak to you? It's just a two-way conversation. You don't ever go to God and ask him for something. I heard, I think it was Chris Valentin when he started prophesying to, having a call to meet with leaders and political leaders and stuff. I heard him tell the story about, he was talking to Cindy Jacobs. And of course, Cindy Jacobs has prophesied over just so many heads of state and leaders all over the world. And he was like, well, I don't get words like that. And Cindy is like, oh, you don't wait till you get the word. You set the appointment. Like anytime I go speak somewhere, I say, God has a word for the governor or the mayor or the president. Do you have those connections? Well, yeah, actually, I know the president. Okay, get a meeting with God. God wants to speak to the president. She's like, I don't get the word until I'm in the room. But it's that kind of putting production where you begin to say and identify to people, particularly like business people, like governmental people that are not no nonsense, and they're not looking for fluff. Don't give me an encouraging word about how things are going to be better and we're going to make it through. Like, that's not what I need. I need to know, do we send the Navy SEALs in or not? Yes or no? And when do we send them in? It's kind of like Eisenhower, right? On D-Day. When he actually prayed, like, God, is the weather going to be better tomorrow? We have a small window because of the tide. Should we wait? Should we send him in? We got to make the call. And that was probably the most weighted decision of his life as Supreme Allied Commander, Operation Overlord. Do we send the troops in or not? Because if we get this wrong, if we get the weather itself wrong, we could go into a slaughter and they could never even hit the beach. And so it's that kind of, business guys are the same way. You got CEOs of companies, or even better yet, CEOs of hedge funds, who are moving money in the markets and millions, and some of them responsible for billions of dollars. Like, they don't want some fluffy, God is with you word. They want to know what's going to happen with oil. Is it going to go down or up? Like, what's going to happen with food? With our food shortage is really a thing, or is it just everybody think? Like, people need to know. And so taking the responsibility, first of all, knowing your relationship with God and knowing that you have a relationship with God, that he speaks to you and that you have wins with God and you've tracked them, to have the confidence to boldly approach the throne of grace and say, God, we need information in the real world on this. And we need to know exactly what we should do, and putting that demand on heaven, and then being able to produce that to leaders, putting ourselves on the line. And saying it's been really humbling, because there's a fair amount of things that I haven't gotten that were right. There's a lot that we have, a lot of wins, but especially when you're looking at the political arena and we say, I think this is going to happen, this person at this place at this time, and it doesn't happen. But then it's like, well, what do you do with that? What you do, what I call a postmortem. What we do is we write it up as a brief, and then we go brief the rest of our intelligence service, and we say, okay, here's what I said, and here's what the newspapers say happened. Well, does it mean this happened behind the scenes? Does it mean that prayers possibly change the scenario. Well, those are okay, but that's not what I saw. This is what I saw. So did I see wrong? Did I interpret wrong? And that level of accountability, especially vulnerability, to say, one of the things I say a lot when I teach is, guys, I'm okay with being wrong. Even when I do dream interpretation, we have a live dream interpretation we do every Tuesday. And it's like, I'm okay with being wrong, but here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'm sensing. And, we find that you look at the life of Daniel and Joseph, the first thing they said when they approached the king was, I don't have your answer. The interpretation comes from the Lord. Like they started, that's like the number one thing. They started in humility. So if there's a win, it's not theirs. But it also kind of takes the pressure off of us and it puts the demand on heaven. So I love the idea of production because, as you know, when you start interpreting dreams and word gets out, especially word gets out that whether it's business people or governmental people, suddenly a flood of dreams come in from those kind of people who want real world answers. And then it's easy to get tired. And our people are like, man, we have so many dreams and so much intel and we're pouring over this and it's coming. And it's like, you know what? That's the job of an intelligence service or an intelligence agency. So why would it be different? And I think we've gotten this kind of laid back, well, we can't prophesy on demand kind of. I've heard prophets say, we can't prophesy on demand. Absolutely you can. Are you kidding me? You put a request in for heaven. Now, I understand, don't wear the guys out and all of that, but it would be better if they just said, you know what, I don't feel like I want to prophesy, or I don't feel like I have a word, but they could certainly ask for a word from heaven. And it's not dependent on God's ability to give you a word necessarily. A lot of times it's dependent on our ability to go seek out the answer, right? It's the glory of God to conceal a matter, the glory of kings to search it out. Part of searching it out is just putting in a request for intelligence.
Yeah, God is pouring out, intelligence, all over the earth. And, that's not a new thing. And I remember when he said, I want you to call your school the School of Dream Intelligence. I'm like, people are going to think we're net jobs, School of Dream Intelligence. And then after we did it, probably about a year and a half, people started coming out and started talking about, understanding, coming to partner with the apostolic and prophetic. And then you realize, like, that word, BIYN in scripture, in the Hebrew, it actually is the word understanding that translates to intelligence. And, and lots of times it's a manner of building. It's a manner of infiltration. I think you've described intelligence, very well. And, I agree with you that, we don't have to prophesy on demand. I think that's the false understanding of really prophecy, because intelligence officers, we have intel that's out there, right? It's been prophesying for years. It's just a matter of getting it and getting it in the right places. And I think that we're going to begin to see, like what you're talking about, intelligence beginning to take more of a because we're going to have it as things break down. There's going to have to be a chain of intelligence and a chain of order and a chain of command coming forth in the realm of the prophetic that actually is going to produce kingdom results. And I'm reminded. So here's how when we started the School of Dream Intelligence, my finality was, I wanted to train up an Issachar tribe. And my goal was, okay, Issachar was those who knew the times, knew the seasons, they knew what they needed to do. And so my goal was okay, I was going to vet to see, okay, who's getting this level of intel, level of understanding. They're getting a knowledge of the times and seasons. And, they could come into this metron, this sphere of Issachar, because I felt like God was creating a funnel for that. So we just started calling dreamers and started training in foundations, and we began to see people that would advance. And they were specializing in intel. They didn't even know it. And so we began to train them. We began to develop them, and then we began to see them getting deployed in their sphere where they lived. And we just helped facilitate that process. And this was kind of a fulfillment of a prophetic word and words that I'd gotten for years. I would have these people come up to me and say, you're called to release a move of the Spirit. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. But then the Lord began to show me, The move of the Spirit tied to Joel 2 and Acts 2, dreams, visions, and prophecy. That's how you measure it. That's how you quantify it. But the interpretation reads the revelation and it displays it. And then he took me to 3 different passages. And I believe many that are watching this will help ground them and, being part of a community, a body of where God's producing and forming his life, his living life through intelligence. And it's in John chapter 6, Jesus comes and says that this is fulfilled here today. I am fulfilling the words of Isaiah in chapter 54. The Son of God is standing before you. He says, there's a time coming when all righteousness will be fulfilled and all your children will be taught by the Lord. He says this in John 6. And I've always wondered in Isaiah 54, man, that must have been a crazy passage, a crazy prophet, Isaiah, telling the Israel, there's coming a time when God is going to literally teach your children. They're going to be taught by God. They're not going to need a man to teach them. I mean, that's a pretty weighty prophecy. And then you go in and and he ties John 6 to Isaiah 54 and says, this is that moment. And then you tie that to Psalm 32. David says, I will guide them with my eye and I will teach them. There's a Hebrew word. It's called I believe it's Shazra or Shazrak. But if you look up that word, I began to do a study on the teaching between John 6, Isaiah 54, Psalm 32. That word, I will guide you with my eye, which is prophetic reality, and I'll teach you along the way. That word means to facilitate the flow, and it means to direct or to aim to hit a target. And I'm like, wow, so you were saying this whole time, dreams, visions, and prophecy are a fulfillment of God guiding the flow of the Spirit, like intelligently, directingly. And then he said, yeah, go to Exodus chapter 4. Well, I go to Exodus chapter 4. This is where Moses, been in the wilderness, he's going to be sent back to Egypt. He tells him, listen, gives him all the excuses why I can't do it. And he says, go and I will teach you along the way. And it's the same thing. He says, look, you're not going to have it in the moment, but you're going to get it as my spirit, my flow's coming. Dreams, visions, prophecy, all these different realities encountering you. And I really believe this is what Jesus is saying. This is the language. This is where I teach you directly. And I believe there will be those that will move more efficiently in intelligence. But I really believe that this reality of proximity to God, producing that nature caliber of intelligence of Elijah, is being released into the earth for one of the greatest moves that we've ever seen.
Wow, I think that's so encouraging. And if you're a dreamer, and even if you're a prophetic voice, just know that there is more and there's deeper, and don't be afraid to push the limits. Put a demand on heaven. Ask God for 5 prophetic dreams a week, or I usually dream 2 to 6 times a night. Write them all down. Pay attention to your dreams. Listen to them. Press in, even if it's a nightmare, especially actually if it's a nightmare, or if it's a dream that makes you uncomfortable. Just write it down and then go back to the Lord and say, what does this mean? Because I think we've been fed a bill of goods, this idea that, well, God speaks occasionally, once in a while. If it's a super vivid dream, then I know it's a God dream, and the rest of the time it's either a soul dream or a demonic dream. And this has been one of the highlight revelations that I feel like the Lord has given me, is the whole idea of demonic dreams and soul dreams. Biblically, they don't exist. And so what I do, and the position that we take and that I teach, is assume 100% every single dream comes from God. And there's so many people in the prophetic that are so not used to that they look down on that like it's almost an immature way of looking at dreams. And it's like, well, the Bible says discern spirits. Well, that's true. Dreams are not spirits. Well, the Bible says God has not given us a spirit of fear. Well, God didn't give you a spirit. It's actually a spirit of cowardice or timidity. That means you're not a coward. That means faced with a warning dream of what might happen in our nation, you don't cower in fear and be like, oh, take it away. I can't handle it. Or I'm going to rebuke it as being from the devil. You buck up and you say, now, what do we need to do to be the sons of Issachar, the men and women who see the times and seasons and know what they should do? If God can never warn you, If God can never make you uncomfortable, then you can never grow. So the idea, this gross conceptual error in the body of Christ, that if a dream makes us slightly uncomfortable or makes us afraid, we just rebuke it and it's not from God. I love who coined the phrase, and it wasn't me, but when people start talking about end time stuff, they're like, you can't rebuke away the book of Revelation. Like, there are things that are going to happen that are going to be extremely unsettling. And again, look back at the whole year of 2020. And would you rather know they're coming and then not know? Because they're going to happen either way. Would you rather God speak to you and give you preparation like he did through guys like Dana Coverstone? And the biggest word that came out over and over and over again was brace yourself. And a lot of it, because he showed him headlines, was brace yourself. This isn't what's going to happen. These are the lies that you're about to hear. This is the propagandized agenda of the media, and this is what they're going to tell you. It's not necessarily what's happening. And if we reject a good portion of dreams, or we don't write dreams down, and we use the excuse, well, I think it was a tasty bit of cheese, as Scrooge says, or a piece of pizza, it was a soul dream, or it was a demonic dream. Look, write it down first in every detail and then seek out the understanding. And if you haven't been trained with the ability to seek out the understanding on your own just yet, that's okay. But then seek out somebody who specializes in this area. Most pastors don't. Most prophets don't. Seek out somebody that works almost exclusively in dreams and has a strong gift of dream interpretation, and seek it out from the Lord yourself. And that's why Tom and I have such a heart to train people to do this, is because there's such a lack of actionable intelligence that's coming. And we have the direct line to heaven, like the whole idea of heaven to earth. Are we creating a space in our lives? Are we stewarding the word of God in our life, that if he speaks to you in dream or a vision or a prophetic word, or if he gives you an impression in your mind, do you write it down or do you blow it off? And if you write it down, do you then seek out what it means? And if you seek it out, then do you take action in your life because of the dreams and the revelation that God is giving you?
Amen.
So what are some big wins that you've seen related to, we love the stories. Of course, everybody loves when it works, and when it doesn't work, we minimize it. So either share something that was like, man, we couldn't have ever foreseen that this would happen, but we had a dream and then it happened, or something that you thought you saw and then it bombed classically and it didn't happen at all.
Well, man, so much of our life revolves around dreams. I think the greatest joy that we've had of really seeing and pursuing dreams has been watching those that we're called to walk alongside of, watching their marriage really become yoked together, watching them go through a mutual deliverance. We have these testimonies, or we're surrounded by them, where one individual would come into our school. Usually it's the woman, and the guy's like, hey, you're crazy. I don't believe in this stuff. And they start dreaming. And then before you know it, God is giving them the message that their wife's been telling them for, so long, for years. And then the kids begin to dream. And then God begins to give the blueprints for the times and seasons. Like, I'm thinking of one family in general that's come through our course. It's part of our community. And, God began to just speak about all their daughters, about, specifically where they were going to be going to school. And, which was really comforting to the mother to know that, and we were just kind of walking alongside of this with them. And, just the different transitions that they were being brought to. They were being brought out of, certain structures of community that they've been in. Because once you go deeper, and once you start really walking this out, and you start believing these types of things, you begin to stand out like a sore thumb. The favor of God's on you, but you begin to be, a bullseye. But then that's where, the supernatural begins to take an effect. Another story was, for the last 6 years, we've had people live with us. My wife and I, we have a 6-year-old son, and we have a deep heart for discipleship. And probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I have a dream. The Lord takes me back to my old house I grew up in, which is my father's house. Let me back up because this story gets a little swirly. But so I grew up actually in Waco, Texas. John's actually there. It's one of my loves for John is John lives in Waco. I'm from there. Grew up there. All my family's in Waco, Texas. My dad was a home builder and grew up, had a very secluded life growing up. And when I began to start dreaming, God began to take me back to my father's house. And he began to deliver me. He began to take me back and give me the things that I didn't have growing up. God told me, where you weren't fathered, I'll father you, and I'll teach you to father others. And he took me back to my father's house, and I would go to different rooms. And when I'd go to different rooms, God would be focusing on different things that he wanted to give me that was part of the prophetic destiny of that room. And again, my dad had passed away at the time he began to take me back into these places. So I didn't know who lived there. I didn't know how God was going to do this, but he said, I'm going to give you a father's blessing. I never got one. Well, 5-6 years ago, I wake up and I've got a message from a guy that messages me and says, hey, brother, I wanted to send you a message because I have a friend that shares your post and I've been reading them and I've been enjoying them. And oh, by the way, I live on Tom Ledbetter Road. Now, what he did not know was that there was only one house on that road. That road was named after my namesake, which was my grandfather's brother. He was the county commissioner. He died a few months before I was born, so I was his namesake. They named the road after him. I was given his name. My dad built a house there. All my childhood is going up and down Tom Ledbetter Road. And remember, I have a promise from the Lord saying, I'm going to give you a father's blessing, and I'm going to make you a father. Well, this man messages me, and I'm thinking, what are the odds that this guy is living in the house that my father built? I'm in this window of deliverance with dreams. Well, I go and I look at his page, and sure enough, all the pecan trees that me and my father planted, he's out there with his kids, and they're picking up the pecans. They had just closed on the house. 10/10/2015 is when they closed on the house. And the Lord said, the devil's come to kill, steal, and destroy, but I've come to give life and life abundantly. He's going to invite you to his house, and you're to say yes. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was overwhelmed. Well, that night I have a dream about the Lord taking me into my father's house, and I began to see things in this individual. And I prophesied it to him the next morning. I had no idea the guy's a pastor in Waco. The guy was pastoring a church at Antioch Church, and one of a missions church. And he invited me to come down. I brought some of my friends, and this was no one knew how big of a moment this was, because no one could know that I had been carrying this promise, and I had no idea how God was going to answer it. But he began to walk me around the facility. He began to show me areas of the house that he finished that my dad never was able to finish. I began to pray over his family. Right when I'm about to walk out, he said, the Lord told me I'm to do something for you. The Lord said, I'm to pray over you and give you a father's blessing. Now, I got the father's blessing. Now, let me tell you, that came through a dream. It came through a dream at my father's house from a fathering leader that was a missionary, a writer. I mean, we're still in contact. We still talk. And so to get to this next point, as that wasn't enough, I had a dream after probably around 5 years ago as well. The Lord took me to my front house of my father's house. I was in a bus, let me out. I go and I knock on the front door, and all of a sudden I hear the principality of Chicago behind the door. And I don't know how to tell you other than I heard it. I sensed it. I knew it was a principality. I knew it was tied to Chicago. And the Lord said, wait here, I'm going to send people. Now, after I had that dream, about 2 years after, I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I began to pray over a brother. He came up to me and he said, you have no idea everything I've been praying, everything I've been declaring. He had driven from Florida to Pennsylvania. He said, you just confirmed it. And he said, the Lord told me I'm to have your back. And he was from Chicago. he came and he lived with me for about a year. And, his story was his father, he had been saved for, I think, less than a year, but was on an accelerated path with the Lord, was really seeking him. His father did furniture, was from Italy. He had done specific furniture for Oprah Winfrey. And he was a day trader. He was a very successful broker in Chicago, and had gone through a transformation where the Lord was doing something new and really bringing him into his prophetic inheritance. God brought him to our house. He would have dreams every night. He would go through deliverance. We would facilitate the blueprint, and within probably 1 year, the guy was married. He married a friend in the city. She has a furniture company. They restore furniture. They got married, and they went through a really shaking, but God was refining them both. He was bringing the fullness of their destinies together. And long story short, now they have integrated the kingdom into their business. It is thriving. It is prospering. They're making kingdom international connections. God has done a work in their marriage and their family. There's been a restoration. There's, these types of stories, right? All happening. All we're doing is just facilitating dreams. These signs that are happening. Those are two of probably the most significant stories that have touched my life. That just make me believe in the power of God as the Lord of the dreams.
Wow. Wow. I love that. The Father's blessing, the Father's house. That spirit of Chicago too. Those are incredible. That's amazing. Well, so as we've talked, you've mentioned transitioning from some of the things that you've done before into some new things.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are some of the new things that you feel like God is entering you into with this calling of intelligence on your life?
Well, we pastored for years and really learned how to pastor people with intelligence. That season was, every pastor can affirm pastoring's not for the faint of heart. We learned a lot through that. We've launched new schools. We've launched these online platforms that are really helping to anchor a lot of the regions we're beginning to move into. Different states that that are opening up. And typically when we're going into these regions, we're working with, mobilizing regions that are bringing together ministries, bringing together businesses that are beginning to look holistically at their city, almost like a revelation, the angel of the Lord, John, and he's saying he spoke to this region and that region. We're really moving more into regional concepts and helping leaders just continue to pioneer and infiltrate and extend the borders and the boundaries for what God is doing from city to city. I mean, I have a heart really to see mobilization of cities, moving and Zechariah 8 was one of the promises given to Jonathan Edwards, and it spawned the Great Awakening. And it was one city would travel to another city, would grab the hem of Jesus. 10 men would grab the hem of one man. And I really believe that God is really moving us into a place of mobilizing regions with intelligence, and then creating these online platforms for kingdom leadership. I really believe in the next 10 years, the things that we're focusing on are going to be tables of leadership that are going to be filled by intelligence people, business people, kingdom people, and then what I would call church leaders, but ecclesia leaders that are part of oikos leaders. I believe we're going to see kingdom business tables form in regions. I believe we're going to see regional eldership beginning to form that's with an apostolic framework. I believe we're going to see shepherding tables. I believe we're getting away from the one-man show, and we're getting into regional blueprints where we're going to have the intelligence to officiate it and to facilitate it. And I believe every one of these tables is going to have intelligence officers that specialize in these realms, that it's going to, I believe it's key to Ephesians 3:10, the manifold wisdom of God being made known to the rulers and the powers in the land, that there's infiltration coming, like Reese House. Reese Howells, and I believe God's raising up the same level of intercession that was coming out of Wells that prevented Hitler from coming into the nation. And Dunkirk, the story, that was intel given to Churchill. And so we're focusing on this intel. How can we partner with leaders, transforming cultures as it's getting darker, it's going to get brighter, but there's a lot of change happening. So we're committed to kind of seeing what inroads await us there. But we're committed to really focusing on this mobilization and resourcing, training, and connecting the body.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm excited to see what the next year, 5 years, 10 years looks like, and imagine where we'll be with, I feel like intelligence, spiritual intelligence, dream intelligence is coming more into the mainstream, and more people are using that vernacular. People have started to start organizations with the spiritual intelligence in the headline, write books, and so I feel like it's quickly getting to a critical mass where it's going to be, I believe, a more accurate, a more accountable, a more centralized move of the prophetic, where information is coming in and we're looking at it from multiple sources. And like you said, I believe particularly, what we have is we have like 10 different areas of study, and we have teams of people on each area, like national security or international affairs. What is God saying about Ukraine and Russia and China and what's going on in the world right now? And so we sort these into dreams by sometimes regions, at least for international affairs. And then we'll have people look, and some of the people that we have master's degrees in Mideast policy, and so they have a real intelligent background understanding the region, or they have families from the region, and so their mom and dad immigrated, or they speak the language, and so as they begin to get dreams about these countries, they have much more ties to them than just the average person. And so the wisdom and the knowledge that they have, and they could even go ask the elders of the family, hey, what about this and what about that, because God is speaking about it in a dream. It's absolutely fascinating. And so we're seeing, like I said, it's a big leap forward, I believe, for all of the prophetic movements. But in particular, those that embrace dreams and those that embrace the idea of digging in deep or putting a demand on heaven to go back and say, well, yeah, I appreciate that things are going to shift, but I need to know when they're going to shift and how they're going to shift and what plays we make to prepare for the shift. And what does that mean exactly? Like, don't just give a warning dream, and every warning dream means, well, just become a prepper. Just buy food and matches and hope for the best. Or which I believe is almost worse yet, is when people say, just pray. Never just pray. When God gives you intelligence, you also pray. And again, it goes back to George Washington. God gave that man, incredible intelligence, visions that still apply to this country even today. In fact, I feel like his fourth vision is what we're in right now. For those of you that are unfamiliar, you can look up the visions of George Washington, but he was well known to be a man of prayer. And particularly as he was at Valley Forge and they were praying through that winter and the difficult things and the death and the chaos, the destruction, the cold, the sickness, the stuff that people were experiencing there. And he began to pray, but he didn't just pray. He picked up a gun, he picked up a musket, and he led an army. And because of that man's sacrifice and because of his leadership, we have the country that we have today. And we're rapidly approaching an hour, I believe, if we're not already in it, that similar sacrifices are going to be made, not exactly like George Washington, but that people are going to have to do more than post on Twitter what they don't like about America. They're going to have to, they're going to have to get out there. And we see a lot of people, a lot of my friends are doing this. They're running for office. We've had people that we've trained in spiritual intelligence that are now running for office or occupying seats in offices. And the whole discussion about, like you said, what do we do for a region is so much facilitated when suddenly you have somebody running for a governor of a state or a city council person or a member of Congress. And now they want to know, what is God's mandate on this region? Because I want to legislate accordingly. And now suddenly people are in positions, they're picking up governmental mandates again, like George Washington did. His first was a delegate to the Continental Congress, and then it was commander in chief, right, of the Continental Army, and then it was the first, of course, president of the United States. And so he picked up different mantles. And if you read about George Washington, his passion was farming. Like, he wanted to go back to Mount Vernon and retire. Like, he wanted to spend time with his family. He was away from his family for so long, and he didn't even want to consider being president. And it was people that said, your leadership is required in this hour. And there's so many people that's happening to in the political arena. In fact, one of the first questions that I ask people, because we get people all the time now that are coming and saying, hey, I'm running for Congress, or I'm running for Senate or governor or Secretary of State or this or that. Do you have anything? Do you have, are you getting anything? Do you have dreams? Can you put in a request for information? And I love these conversations, because the very first thing I say is, how do you know, or when did you know? I phrase it this way so as to not be offensive. When did you know that God called you to run for office? And so many times they'll say, well, I had a dream, well, I had an encounter, well, I was never seeking this out, but I felt like God clearly spoke to me. And those are the people that it's like, we want to work with you. God's called you to run for office in this season. If there's any way that we can help you. And again, we have all of the blueprints, like you say, Tom, the blueprints of heaven are available. One of the first dreams that a friend of mine had was about an empty warehouse and a group of people, a group of prophetic dreamers consulting or having a conversation with people from 4 different intelligence agencies. And the whole idea of the prophetic warehouse is, it was like God was saying, I have all of these blueprints and scrolls, but who's taking it seriously? Like, who's going to write this stuff down, and not just write it down, but who's going to seek out the wisdom, get the interpretation, and then partner with people to make these things happen? Because I know God's given songs, inventions, all kinds of different business ideas to Christians who didn't do anything with it. So then he turned around and gave it to somebody else who maybe wasn't a Christian, but they did something with it. And that number one song was supposed to be somebody else's. You think of the number one re-recorded song in world history, which is Yesterday by Paul McCartney, completely came in a dream, the whole thing.
Wow.
The whole thing. He walked around humming it for 6 months, asking his friends, who sings this? They finally sat him down and said, look, nobody knows what you're talking about. Would you just write this stinking song? And he did. And it's the number one re-recorded song in world history. So God has political strategies, campaigns to restore the freedom and the democracy. Well, the ideas of democracy, a constitutional republic that we actually have, and to restore liberty and freedom in America. And he's causing people, he's requiring something of people. People that before were stay-at-home moms are now running for school board, are now running for, I've retired grandmas that are now running for city council, pastors that are running for Congress, people that are running for secretaries of state to ensure the election integrity in our states. People running for governor. There's going to be people running for president that are commissioned by God, and God is moving on their behalf through spiritual intelligence. But it's not just governmental. Daniel and Joseph had a governmental call to advise kings, queens, heads of state, prime ministers, ambassadors, those kind of people, right? But there's also business leaders. There's even leaders in the church. I mean, leaders in every area of influence. They need the intelligence of heaven. But there are things that are being highlighted in this hour. And right now I believe we are in a spiritual war for America. And if you're in a war that requires new tactics, you're going to need a different level of intelligence than you've ever had before. So, wow, thank you, Tom, for being such a pioneer in this area, for having a school of dream intelligence, for taking on the mantle, for training the next generation. I love that. Position, permission, production, reproduction, and what was the final one?
Respect.
Respect, yeah. Credibility in a space where people know by your name. And, it's so fascinating when you look at the life of Joseph or Daniel. Daniel required tell me the dream first, and then tell me the interpretation, because if you can tell me the dream, I know you're legit. Once that happened, they never asked credibility again. And even the subsequent kings that he advised, the advisors would go to the king, like the writing on the wall, and say, there's a man that advised your father, O king, that knew all kinds of mysteries and symbols and dreams and visions. And for Joseph, it was the cupbearer. The cupbearer said, hey, when I was in prison, I had a guy said I'd be restored in 3 days, and here I am. And so he walked in with that credibility. It didn't even have to prove himself to Pharaoh. Pharaoh just said, here's my 2 dreams. And then, of course, Joseph was made viceroy of Egypt. Like from then on, imagine the amount of wisdom and understanding, intelligence, and dreams that these 2 men used in their position, perhaps even ones that aren't recorded in the Bible, but they didn't have to prove themselves beyond that. Like they had one shot, and God came through. God gave them the words when they stood in front of the king. And from then on, their credibility was rock solid. And not only their credibility, but they even restored and fathered the other wise men of the realm, which I think is amazing. There's a call of God on your life, Tom, and others, mine and others that are raising people up to lead groups of wise men, sons of Issachar, wise men and women, intelligence agencies. These words are all interchangeable. They're groups of people that are going to be sought out more and more in the days ahead as the markets are volatile, as businesses fail, as things shift dramatically in the realm of even like media and social media, as opportunities are present, but opportunities for crashes as well as growth is just as imminent. And people are going to want to know, what do we do? And they're going to go to people like you that have the answers. And so thank you for being a father in this area, Tom.
Amen. Yeah, it's a blessing, man. And right back at you. I was actually in Daniel 2 earlier this week. And, one of my prayers for, everybody watching is that, when you read Daniel 2 and you begin to see the defiance of, but the obedience of, these 3 that followed Daniel, they were his friends. They got promoted, or Daniel was promoted in the midst of Babylon over the whole providence of Babylon, and I just believe God's given providential favor, to us in the midst of a Babylonian culture, to be favored and to do things out of the box. And man, I just pray this interview was a blessing to your viewers, and that would spur us all to really seek that providential favor God wants to give us on our land and territory.
Wow, that's so good. Well, it's always such a rich time when we talk, Tom. I just love it. I don't think we've had a phone call under an hour. We get on the phone and it's just catching up and what's going on. And hey, did you see this guy had a dream? And hey, this prophet said this. And hey, what about this? And I just love the opportunity to really work with somebody that is a pioneer in this area and really understands what God is doing in the realm of spiritual intelligence and dream intelligence.
Amen.
So,
it's been a blessing.
Thanks again for joining us today, Tom.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, such a rich time. I just, I love it when there's like-minded people. That this isn't a revelation that I have alone. There's all kinds of other people out there that God is speaking to, and even more and more. I mean, meeting people at a wedding who understand and are teaching intelligence and dreams. It's just those kind of divine appointments mark our lives and help us build friendships and beyond. If you're looking, if any of this resonated with you, if you're looking to dive deeper into the realm of dreams, we have the Spiritual Intelligence Mentorship. Feel free to go take a look. It's open right now for enrollment. You can look at spiritualintel.com. You do have to apply, but we have all kinds of other tools and things. Dream Life Decoded, obviously, on YouTube is a place that you can go, and we have resources. All of the resources that we're creating and making are designed specifically to take people on a journey into a deeper understanding of tapping into the intelligence that God gives us through visions and dreams. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us for another interview. And we have these every week on Dream Talks. We do live dream interpretation as well every Tuesday. So thank you again, and we will see you next time here on Dream Talks.